So at the end of the last video I showed that my boards were getting a little bit warped, a little bit worn, they were coming apart in places, and they were just basically done. So I decided for this one I was going to make some new ones. I start by saving the bits of roads, sorry about the shaky camera. Cut off the roads because I didn't actually have any more cork and I thought they were usable as they were, so I could attach them to the new boards. So that's them cut out. The new boards are going to be placed on this quite thin plywood, and I think it will give it a slightly better base and it'll be a bit more secure all round, I think. So I actually start off, I'm going to glue down the bits of road and use a combination of white glue and a bit of hot glue just to keep them in place while the white glue dries. So I decide exactly where I want them to go on the boards. And then quite simply glue them down. Now just apply the white glue all over the surfaces where they are, and then use a little bit of hot glue around the edges of the board, so it'll keep it tacked in place while the white glue dries, which will give it a much stronger bond on. And hopefully they shouldn't just come up so easily. So I glue them down, and then I put another board over the top, and then put some weight on that till they dry. So I repeat it with the other bits, so that's all 3 bits of board. And like I say, the white glue and the combination of the plywood underneath, it'll give a much sturdier base for everything. For the 4th board, I wanted to put a bit of a hill in the background, so I'm going to use this stuff. So I'm just drawing out a simple pattern, and then I'm going to use my hot wire cutter just to cut it out. Again, don't have to be exact. Because of the shape of the cutter, I can't actually follow the pattern, so it ends up being a little bit squarer, but it still worked quite as well. Once I'm happy with the size and the rough shape of it, I used the little bit of offcut to add a second layer onto the hill. And then once again, I'm going to mark out the position of that, and I'm going to glue it down. So I do texture it a little bit first with the tin foil. It takes quite a long time, but you get quite a nice texture on it. And I glue those 2 pieces together. Again, the white glue, it'll give it a really strong bond, and it should be fine for this. You can get foam safe super glues and things, but I find the white glue works really well, and they shouldn't come apart. So I couldn't actually find my cocktail sticks to stick them together, so I ended up just cutting down some coffee stirrers and forcing them through. It just keeps both pieces together, stops them moving about, and you get a nice strong bond for them. So yeah, once that was stuck down, I stuck it down onto the base, left it to dry, removed the bits of coffee stirrer, and then it's time to get my splooge all over it. So once that's spread out, I use a damp cloth for some surface texture. The cloth actually dries out really quickly, especially in the heat we've got just now, so you just need to keep dampening it down, and I just go over the full surface of it. And then once that's dry, you get quite a nice surface texture that you can work with. I do repeat this with the other boards as well, over the non-road areas, just so I've got a consistent texture over everything. And the next thing's painting. So I'm just actually going to use some quite cheap acrylic paints for this. I'm going to base coat the area black. I'm actually going to use a sponge for painting all of the texture rather than brushes. The advantage of using the sponge is you don't get any brush marks. I could have used a spray base coat, but I had all this acrylic paint, so I decided to use that. So leave the base coat to dry. These are the colours I'm going to use for the actual painting of it. And I'm just going to start with a kind of dark mid-brown. Wet down my sponge. Wring it out. And then get a decent amount of paint on there. And then just start sponging it over all the boards. So that's the first layer. And then the other boards. So as you can see, the sponge, it leaves a lot of the black base coat, but it begins to build up some quite nice textures and layers through it. So I'm just going up the colour range, so that's the next brown. And again, just dab it all over the top. You just be as random as you can be with this. It highlights the raised areas. If you press down a bit harder, it will go into some of the cracks, but it does leave some quite good texture behind. And that's the board when I've gone over it with that colour. And then I go for a yellow next. So I do mix it in with the second colour that I use, just to kind of tone down the yellow a bit. And then this is one of the highlight colours, so you're just going over certain areas. So I go over the edges here, a few little lines through it, and it brings some of the colour up and shows off some of the detail in the board. Be aware the colours do kind of darken down as it dries, but that's just what happens. So this is my final highlight colour for the board, which is a light kind of creamy beige colour. Again, you want to be quite light with this one because it is the final highlight colour. And I'm just, again, going over certain areas with it. Highlight where there's raised areas. You can just be as heavy or as light as you want with this. So yeah, that's my finished basic painting of it. I do decide to go over the kind of mountainy edge with some greys, so I just mix together black and white. just to give a little bit of variation between the actual flat surfaces and the hillside. And then I actually mix in some green to it as well. So mix the green into the grey so you get a slightly more muted colour. And then I dab that on up the edges as well. This brings a little bit of colour in at this stage. So I decided I want to do some crash barriers, so there was a video a while ago where I bought some stuff off Temu. I thought these were quite large I-beams, it turned out they were absolutely tiny. I think they'll actually be quite a good scale for making some crash barriers along the side of the road. So I'm simply going to use that as the actual crash barrier. For the uprights for it, I'm just going to cut little sections of it. So I just cut them into random lengths, making sure I've got enough to go over all of the roads, and then I just cut the actual crash barrier into 1 centimetre uprights. You need quite a lot for them. I think I end up cutting about 30 or 40 of them all together in the end because I didn't have enough. And then, quite simply, super glue it down. That's all my finished crash barriers, and once again I just decide where I want to place them. Make sure they're facing the right way round, because I did initially when I was testing it out, I held them up the wrong way round. And then a little bit of super glue and just hold them in place till they dry. And I could have actually painted these before I glued them down, but because I didn't want to, I'd have to glue them down to the base and then paint them and then take them off of that and then glue them down to the boards. I just decided to stick them down to the board, paint them in situ. But because I've done that, you can actually see them quite well. So yeah, it's just going to be a base of brown. I've actually switched over to my kind of regular paints that I use for painting models for these, not the other acrylics, because with the plastic I felt that the kind of actual model paint would stick a bit better. So yeah, just do base coat of brown over everything. Then I do a bit of a highlight of silver over the top of that. So once again, I'm using the sponge for this, so it can go on randomly. It should just highlight the high areas. That's that once the silver's applied. My next stage, I'm using my new favourite yellow oxide, and I'm literally going to coat the entire things in this. I will say you do not need a lot of it. I put a couple of drips on the board and that was enough to do all of the rails. So that's my roads at this stage. I do decide I want a bit more damage to the road, so the bit that was originally cracked, I actually lift up a bit more. And I'm going to put some just off scraps of foam underneath. So just squirt in some glue. Force the foam in. Actually, I have a little, I think I used 2 bits of scrap for this, and then I just splooge across the front of it. I'm not actually being very delicate with it because you can show the cracks, you can show the base. It's meant to be a damaged, destroyed road that's been all wrecked up, so the more scrappy it is, the better, I think. So I did find that the original boards that I cut off, they weren't quite straight along the edge. So in order to fill that gap, I'm actually going to damage them up a bit. So it looks like there's a big massive crack running along the centre of the road. So that's how I start it. I do cut out a few little bits, so you've got some little lines so it doesn't look quite as straight, running right down the centre. And remember, if you're using a knife, be very careful with it. So I do add a little bit of the splooge into some of the bigger gaps. And then it's ready for painting. So I do decide I want to repaint the whole roads because I wasn't really happy with how they look originally, so I'm just going to put a grey right over the top of everything. I'm going to go back to my sponge and just stipple on a lighter colour along some of the edges and the cracks, just to bring out some of the detail in the board. Once that's dried, that's how it looks. I do go to use a wash that I'd made up, and then I realised that it was not going to work. So I end up sponging it, and I think once I've sponged it, it actually looks okay. It was a homemade wash, and it thickened up, and I didn't realise it thickened up. And then I decide I'm going to put on a little bit of colour. I don't really think you notice it too much. I'm going to use a couple of blues, a couple of greens. I'm just going to drip them straight onto the road, and then I'm going to use the sponge. So they're both speed paints that I use, so they should be quite translucent. So it'll show some of the colour and it'll also highlight it. And then I go over again with the lighter colour. And then I decide to redo the markings at the centre of the road. And that's when I encountered my first problem. So I didn't actually realise that I'd started taping it down, and I just decided to do it all in one shot. So I began to apply the tape. Then I went to do the colour. And when I put my hand up to stop my camera, I realised that the card was actually full, so that slowed me down for a little bit. So I don't actually have any footage of painting the yellow on, but basically I just used the sponge, went up the lines, and I made them a bit narrower than they were before, and I think they actually look a lot better. Then to conceal the gaps a little bit, I'm going to do the same 3 colours that I used on the actual base of the board. So that's the darker of the browns. And then I go over them again with the kind of mid-brown and a little bit of the yellow on top just to highlight it. So I do apply all 3 of these colours while the previous one's still wet, so they kind of blend in a bit better. So that's it with the round. I do highlight the edges with the light beige colour a little bit more. And then it's time for tufts. So I just go about, I apply them just haphazardly. With these ones I do use super glue to stick them down, because I found it was weirdly sticky when you take it off, and it stuck to itself quite a lot, but they won't actually stick to the board that well. So the smaller tufts, when I was actually taking them off, I found out the kind of yellowy, greeny bits on the top were coming off, so I just removed them before I stuck them down. And then I'm going to put some static grass down. So literally going to pour on some glue, use a paintbrush to spread that out, and decide exactly where I want it. And then I'm just going to sprinkle on my static grass. I always put a little bit of paper underneath just so I can tap them off and save the grass, because I think, like I said in a previous video, I've actually had this static grass for a very, very long time. And it's getting a bit low now. I have bought some new stuff, but that'll be for another video using that. So you tap it off from a few different angles, that way you make sure you've caught all the grass, and that's those first 2 boards with the static grass applied. And that's the second 2. As I didn't go crazy with it, I was quite sparing and did it in clumps. So off camera I painted up these little bits of terrain. So they're going to have a little kind of point of interest on the board, and then I glued them down. I also decided I wanted to create this little skeleton hitchhiker just sitting there waiting at the side of the road. So don't think he's going to make it to New Vegas, sadly. Let's have a look at the final board. This was it before, and this is the updated version. So hope you think it's a bit of an improvement. I'm quite happy with it. I did apply a lot more tufts off camera, and I like my little details. I might go back in again and apply a bit more to it, but who knows? Guess we'll have to wait and see in the next battle report. I hope you enjoyed it. It did take a little while to do, mostly letting stuff dry and things, and just life getting in the way generally. But anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye now.